Okay, now I want to do problems 3 and 4, which are the more difficult ones, mainly because the x squared has a coefficient that needs to be multiplied by on both 3 and 4. Okay, I've got the problem ready to be worked here, x and y t-chart ready to go there. I'm going to plug in a 0 for x just because that's the easiest math. Now, again, you have to square first. Remember in elementary school, you do exponents before you multiply. This is x squared, then multiply by -2. So I want 0 squared, which is 0, times -2, which is 0. I plug in a 0 for x, and I take 0 times 8, which is 0. And then the constant is -6. There is no variable on this, so you don't multiply it. Okay? And now 0 plus 0 minus 6. 0 should have gone with -6. If you don't have 0 with -6, then you're making a math error. And now you plot that point. 0, -6 does fit. It's right there. Okay? Now I'm going to plug in 1 and see what happens. If it goes off the chart, then I need to plug in -1. Okay, that's what I mean by the battleship part. Okay, I plug in a 1. I square it first and get 1. Then I multiply by -2 and get -2. I plug in 1 for x, multiply by 8 and get +8. And then -6. Okay. Now I add those three terms together and that becomes 0. 1 goes with 0. Okay, so that's right there on the x-axis. When x is 1, y is 0 is that ordered pair. Okay, so I'm going to plug in a 2 and see what happens. Okay, plug in a 2. I square it first and get 4. Let me section these off. There's the first set of work. There's the second set of work. Here's the third set of work. Okay, I plug in a 2 and I square it and get 4. Multiply by -2 and get -8 for the first term. If I put a 2 in for x, I'm going to get -8 for the first term. Plug in a 2 for x here and I get +16. And remember the constant is -6. Do not multiply it by x because it doesn't have an x on it. When I add all those together, let's see, I'm going to add the two negatives and get -14, +2. So when x is 2, y is 2. If I put a 2 in for x, I'm going to get a 2 for y. That ordered pair is right there. The ordered pair, 2 for x, 2 for y, is a single dot. Okay, so what we have is the graph is coming up, starting to curve. Chances are we're going to be done after the next one, but we'll find out. Plug in a 3. Square it first and get 9. Then multiply it by -2, and the first term is -18. Okay. Plug a 3 in for x, multiply by 8, and the middle term is +24. And then the constant is -6. It does not change. When I add all those together, I get 0. So when I plug in an x, I get 0 for y. If I plug in a 3 for x, all that adds up to 0 for y, which is that ordered pair right there. That is the ordered pair 3 for x, 0 for y. And we do have the graph changing directions and coming back down. Okay. Remember, symmetry means this point is going to match up with this point. And if I were to plug in a 4, it would match up with that point right there. Okay? And that's what it would look like. Okay? It kind of looks like a V shape because it's so sharp, but officially it's a curve and it's kind of a tight U shape. Okay? Let me go ahead and go to number 4. Okay? I don't have it prepared yet. Let me do that real quick. Make my T-chart. And then my math is 2x squared plus 4x minus 1. That's what the y number equals. Okay. Always plug in 0 first just because it's easy math. If I put a 0 in for x squared, I get 0. times 2 is 0. Plug a 0 in there, and I get 4 times 0 is 0. Minus 1. Remember, there is no variable in that, so it's always a negative 1. Add those together, and I get negative 1. Okay, 0, negative 1. Okay, so that's the math. If you're not getting negative 1, then you're messing up the math over here. Now, the plot of the point 0, negative 1 should be 0 in the x direction, negative 1 in the y direction, which is on the y-axis. Plug in a 1. Okay. If I put a 1 there, I square first, then I multiply. 1 squared is 1, times 2 is 2. Plug in a 1 for x, and I get positive 4. And then the constant is negative 1. When you add all that up, you should get 5. 1 should go with 5. If you don't have 1 with 5 on Monday's number 4, then you're making a math error over here. Now, if you do have 1 with 5, you might be plotting it wrong. When x is 1, y is 5 is right there. Okay? I want to plug in a 2. If I put a 2 in for x, I take 2 and square it. I square first and get 4. Then I multiply by 2, and the first term should be positive 8. If I put a 2 there, I square first, then I multiply. Put a 2 there, and I get 4 times 2, which is also positive 8. And then minus 1. That is 16 minus 1, which is 15. If you're playing Battleship, basically we went the wrong direction here. When x is 2, y is positive 15 is like way up here somewhere. Okay, so that is not the direction we want to go. If I plug in a 3, it's just going to get worse, so I want to go to the negative direction. Okay, now here's where you got to be careful. This is where if you're using a calculator, it's probably doing it wrong. I take negative 1 and I square it first. Negative 1 squared. Then I multiply by 2. Negative 1 squared is positive 1 times 2 is positive 2 for the first term. Plug in a negative 1 for x, and that's 4 times negative 1, which is negative 4. And then the constant is negative 1. So minus 1 goes there. Combine all that, and we have negative 3. Negative 1 goes with negative 3. If you don't get negative 3, then you're making a math error plugging in. And you should plot it right there. X is negative 1, y is negative 3 is that ordered pair. Plug in negative 2 and see what happens. I'm starting to run out of room here. Plug in a negative 2 right there. Negative 2 squared. Negative 2 squared is positive 4. But then I have to multiply that by 2 because it's 2x squared. Your first term should be positive 8. Plug in negative 2 for x. And that's 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. Minus 1. 8 minus 8 is 0. And that is negative 1. So if you don't get negative 1, when you plug in negative 2, then you're making a math error. And I now plot that, and it's right there. Okay. Yeah. And that means we have bottomed out. The graph is coming down, 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 hits that point right there, and it curves back up. Okay. So these 2 points match up. And then if we were to plug in negative 3, it would match up with this point right here because of symmetry, folding it over. And that kind of gives you a chance to sharpen it up like that a little bit. Yep. All right. Sorry, this video took a little bit longer. But again, if you don't have these ordered pairs, then you're making a math error over here. If you do have these ordered pairs and it's not coming out like this, that means you're graphing them or plotting the ordered pairs wrong. So there's 2 places to make errors. Plugging in and not getting the right y values that go with the correct x values, or you're plotting wrong. Email me if you have any questions, and I will try to get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks.